Dear colleagues, welcome to the Neurocareers News and Live Q&As. And today we're bringing you the latest trends in Neurotech from Society of Neuroscience conference that was held in Chicago this month. So, what are the latest trends in Neurotech? And where is the field heading? To stay competitive in Neurotech, and keeping up with the latest developments is essential. One of the best ways, usually, to prepare for your next big opportunity is by learning about the latest advancements from events like the Society for Neuroscience meeting, the biggest neuroscience event of the year. However, attending such events isn't always feasible due to various constraints like time, travel, or even finances. So that's why we are bringing the insights to you. And today, our guest is Dr. Sarah Wandelt. And Sarah is a neural engineer and an expert in invasive neurotechnology. She will share her experience and key insights from SfN 2024 to help you stay informed on cutting edge advancements in the field. Welcome, Sarah. It's a great pleasure to have you today with us. Thank you very much for joining. And can you please give us a background of what you do and also what does it mean to be a neural engineer? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milena, for inviting me today. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Sarah Wandelt. I'm currently a neural engineer in the Professor Chad Boughton Lab at the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research, where I work on restoring movement and sensation in participants with spinal cord injury. And so how did I get to this position? So I previously did a PhD and a short postdoc at Caltech in the Richard Anderson Lab, where I investigated how grasping speech and even internal speech are represented in the posterior parietal cortex in patients with spinal cord injury. We use a technology that is called Utah array. So we work with participants that have spinal cord injuries. We implant them with microelectrodes in brain areas that are responsible for movement intentions. And then we use those signals to try to figure out what's going on in the brain, to decode their intentions, and to use those signals to control external devices. And so, after doing my PhD in this field, I thought that was an incredibly fascinating field. I really think BCIs have gone a long way and have a long way to go. And especially the kind of data we get with invasive BCIs is really spectacular, the kind of progress that has been done with that lately. And so, after I did my PhD, I wanted to stay in the field. And so I was looking around for positions that would fit my expertise. And Professor Chad Boughton had recently started having a participant in his lab. And so they were looking for people that had experience with this kind of technology. And so as a neural engineer, I'm there to contribute to the research, build the pipelines that we're using for decoding, analyzing the data, coming up with experiments. So it's still very much an academic position. We're analyzing data. We will publish. We're presenting our work to conferences, but it's more like a fixed position, more as like a staff scientist position in the lab. So I've been really enjoying being here.
And what would you say are the necessary skills that you need to possess to become a neural engineer and do the work like you are doing?
That's a great question. So there are a lot of different, I think there are people in this field that come with a variety of different backgrounds. There are electrical engineers. That is a super good skill to have, as you know, we're building equipment. A lot of electrical engineering goes into building these devices and using these devices. There are computer scientists. So we do a ton of data analysis and machine learning is also super popular. So being good at coding is definitely a very good skill. There are people that come from the neuroscience field where, understanding the brain and what is represented where and how do we make sense of these signals. For that, that's a really great skill to have. So I always say that knowing a little bit of all of that, or ideally knowing everything of all of that, would be the best shot. But there are people from a lot of different backgrounds that end up being in this field. So I think in general, having one of these fields where you're good at and then learning about the others is very valuable. um, so yeah, I what I do on a daily basis, for example, is I do a lot of data analysis. So I'll do a lot of coding, but we also have electrical engineers in the lab that they're mostly building the devices, and so there's really a need for a variety of different skills, especially since depending on what part of you're interested in the BCI field, I think that while building the devices is a huge part, knowing what to do with the data is a huge part, knowing how to then, and that's not even a skill that I have developed yet, is like, how do we get that from the patient to actually get that into the field really, and like at home use. Those are also a bunch of different skills as well. How do we commercialize these devices is another whole skill set. So there's a lot of different ways to interact with this field.
Yes, and that's why the field provides opportunities for people from various fields to join and
Yeah.
use their knowledge and implement it. So yes, that's very exciting. And I would like to tell to all our viewers, to all our colleagues that are watching us today, you can learn more about Sarah's experience in the field and also her advice for those who want to join the field of neurotech, to listen to her podcast on our Neurocareers. So please do that, and also a podcast with with Professor Chad Bolton, who works on neural bypass. So from his lab, Sarah is bringing us knowledge so today. So please listen to those podcasts. And now we continue. You mentioned that your position is still fairly academic. You go to the conferences, you present. So let's talk about the latest conference that you presented at, which is SfN. So what is your experience with SfN, and how did you feel this year about the conference?
Yeah, so SfN is really a big, exciting conference in the field, and it's always overwhelming but very exciting to go there. There are so many people there; it's impossible to see everything. I think every time I get there and I get pretty excited what's going on, I get a little bit of FOMO about what all the people are doing, and it's all so good. And so you always feel like you want to be doing a lot of different things. But I always come back with a new sense of excitement and about just impressed about what the field is doing. It's always a very overwhelming experience. I think I've been to SFN 4 or 5 times now, so it definitely gets easier, I would say, with time when you get to know more people, you start to be more aware with the field, you get a better sense of where to go and what to see because there's just so much to see. Also, the BCI field is also getting bigger and bigger, so there's more and more to see as well. And just getting better organized, I think, in a certain sense. So this year was actually quite exciting. I was able to help Jake Guzman to organize a nano symposium. He took the lead in that, but I was able to help a bit in seeing how those symposiums are getting organized. And that was a really cool experience. So we brought together people from a lot of different labs to propose a nano symposium to see if the SFN organization would choose that as a topic. And so I don't know if you're familiar with this, what a nano symposium is, but it's basically short talks of 10 minutes with 5 minutes of questions. And the goal is to bring together people from a lot of different labs to see about a certain specific topic. And our topic was upper limb rehabilitation. And that was a really cool experience. So I was also one of the presenters during the Nano Symposium. So that was also really cool. SfN can be a little intimidating because the rooms are really big. So if you do end up having a presentation, there might be a lot of people that show up, which is exciting and scary. But I think it was a really good experience. And yeah, we had some really cool talks about so the goal really is to see, okay, there's a lot of work in the BCI field about what kind of signals can we decode from where, especially for movement, finger control, hand control. Speech is a huge one, and I'll talk about that later. That was super impressive. Work has been done again this year in that field. But the question is, how can we help people to use their own limbs, especially people with spinal cord injuries or maybe people that have strokes? How can we what can we do in order for them to actually, instead of maybe controlling a robotic arm, what can we do in order for them to use their own limbs? And so that was the topic of the Nano Symposium. And so there was some really cool work about using soft prosthetic gloves. And so a lot of these devices that then get controlled with the BCI. So we have the implant in the brain, we try to decode what the intentions of the participants are, and then we control something, but that's part of the participant's own hand, or maybe their participant's own goals, own shoulder. And that the level of assistance always depends on the level of injury as well. But yeah, so that was a really cool Nano Symposium with really interesting talks. And yeah, no, that was really cool. We had some really cool results also on epidural spinal cord stimulation for upper limb rehabilitation, which is really novel. That's led by the Cortine Lab. They are very famous for helping participants to walk again, and that's usually with epidural spinal cord stimulation that is lower in the spinal cord. Now there we're trying with participants that have higher level of injury, and so to get them to have movements again with epidural spinal cord stimulation. And so they have done some cool progress there as well. And so yeah, no, overall was a very interesting Nano Symposium.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we have already in some comments and some questions. So Professor Boughton said that it's a great discussion. So he gives us his regards and he supports us, which is wonderful. And we have two questions from Adam Jones, PhD, and from Aggie Gimon, also PhD. So maybe we will address these questions a little bit later into the discussion. We will first go and talk as we intended about SfN, and then we can discuss those questions. So Adam and Aggie, please wait for a little bit later, and we will definitely address your questions. But everybody else, please send your questions. We have a dedicated time spot to answer all of them as much as we can to our best abilities. So, okay, so thank you very much, sir. And now let's talk about the latest trends in invasive technologies that you were able to observe at the conference. So, what really caught your attention?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll first start just based off personal interest. I'll talk a little bit of the work that our lab has been doing. So we've been building, Chad Bowden has been in this field for like 20 years or so. So that history goes pretty far. He had a 2016, I think, Nature paper about controlling with functional electrical stimulation, controlling the arm of a participant, but the movement was being controlled by a BCI that was decoding different movement intentions. So we've been pushing this work a little further with having now a bidirectional neural bypass, how we call it, where we both stimulate the spinal cord non-invasively, but also we stimulate in the brain. And the goals that we have is to lead to long-term sensory restoration, as well as motor restoration. And yeah, we've had some really great results with we have currently one participant we're working with. We've been able to get him to, so when he first started to study, he was not able to lift his arms further than a little bit above. I'm trying to show here, but very little motor strength in his limbs. Now he's able to lift his arm all the way up here. which is really, for someone that has not been able to lift his arms, it's like a really big change. And then using that improvement of his ability to lift his arms, we've now been able to custom design a orthotic device that, so this is a 3D printed personalized orthotic device that we can attach to his hand, that he can now use to grasp objects. So recovering his arm strength allowed him to now be actually able to get to his face, which is a big step of this whole setup. And now he's able to grasp that object. So that's being controlled with an implant in his brain. His desire to like close his hand to get to that. But we also have a force sensor that's attached to this orthotic device. So once we indent the cup to a certain extent, or whatever object he's touching, and we pass a certain force level, we're also stimulating him in the brain, in the areas of the brain that are responsible for sensation. So he's able to feel in his thumb and his index when he's actually touching something. And so that was something really cool that Santosh and our lab presented, where this whole set, and also we had a poster about that as well with Steve and Aniket. So this is all super multidisciplinary in the lab. Like everyone is super involved in that. And they showed this improvement of him being able to grasp a cup, to drink from it, to feel the sensation. So that's really cool. I personally have been working a little bit on trying to recover sensation. So that's something that's been really hard to do, is that how can we do long-lasting changes that are not depending on the system? So usually for things like ICMS, or usually BCIs too, once we turn off the system, it doesn't work. If we don't stimulate, he's not going to feel anything. But what we are trying to do is really strengthen those connections between the brain and the spinal cord, by stimulating the spinal cord, activating the spinal cord, then also stimulating in the brain. And we're not quite sure about the mechanisms, but we're really hoping to strengthen this like residual connections that are still existing between these areas. And we actually observed that using this intervention, that he recovered some sensation on his wrist. So it's not really working for every location we've tried, but it seems like for a location where he still has residual connections that were too weak to activate before, this intervention seems to help him to recover some sensation. And that is even long lasting, where like even if we turn the system off, it's still working. So I presented some work on that, and that's also some exciting exciting new, I think that's one way where the field is going now to, is to really try to combine the spinal cord and the brain together and see what kind of changes we can do there. There's a ton of work that's been done on TCS on its own, or epidural stimulation on its own. And there's a lot of work that's been done, well, not as much because it's really hard to do invasive BCI, but there's a lot of work that's been done on that as well. But really doing the combination of both, I think, is one of the big direction the field is going into. Of course, Courteen's lab in Switzerland has been doing a lot of work on that. I really enjoyed Jocelyn's blog. She's the neurosurgeon that is part of Courteen's lab, and she had a lecture at SfN. I really enjoyed her lecture. That was really very impressive work that goes from really like understanding in animal models how the spinal cord can be recovered, or how we can rehabilitate rats that lost the ability to walk to like walk again. They went from rats to monkeys to human, and they really have been having great successes with that. Their patients are usually not complete spinal cord injuries, so it's hard to do these kind of works with patients that really have complete injuries. But for patients that have incomplete injuries or lower level injuries, that has been really a great success for them. It's really impressive. And yeah, as I mentioned, one of the people in our analysis symposium presented work about them now trying the same technology for upper limb rehabilitation. Again, non-complete injuries, because that does make a big difference if someone is complete or incomplete. Our participant is incomplete, so there's a lot of things that will be much harder to do in incomplete participants. But yeah, they've been also able with epidural stim to get him to do different movements, and they're also decoding the intentions from the brain. So I think that's a big field that is currently being quite popular. And yeah, Thibaut Collin actually presented that work. That was really cool. Yeah, and other than that, Also, a big field, which you might be familiar with lately, is how much the speech world has really involved. So if there are questions about the first part, I can do that, but I can also like switch to talking about the speech stuff.
Yeah, so let's see if we have questions about what you just talked about. Not about that yet. So we have questions more about the careers, which we'll address later. So yes, let's talk about speech. And I know that your initial work, your PhD, were about the internal speech decoding. Yes, so it's very relevant to what you've been doing. So let's hear what's going now in the field and how it progressed already. What is the
Yeah,
latest and greatest? Okay.
yeah, absolutely. So I think the speech decoding field, I will always be so impressed by it because the speed at which it like evolves is insane. I think it's been so impressive in the last few years, the progress that has been done. I think 5 years ago, still people were decoding mostly individual words, so like maybe a few phonemes. And nowadays, we really have systems where the participants are able to communicate. The neural stimulus to text is incredibly good. And also now there's been really cool work from Sergei Stravinsky's lab, where they're directly synthesize neural data into real-time speech, which is also really crazy. Like the speed at which they're doing the synthesization is like really, really impressive. And I will say that the talk that impressed me the most and that was really very emotional was Sergei Stravinsky's talk about how their participant is using their system. So they're working with an ALS patient. And so I'll just give a little bit of background about the speech world. So usually implants are being put in areas that are responsible for speech. So they put implants in the speech motor cortex, and they then try to decode phonemes, and then they use those phonemes to estimate what the participant is trying to say, to build words. And you can use large language models that can really help to improve that decoding a lot, just by estimating what's the most likely word that's going to happen. The participants are also able to correct what the output of the models are, but the output is now actually really, really good. And so they were showing the work of their participant that is able to they showed that they basically trained the caretaker to put on the system for them, and their participant was then able to use the system at its own volition. A lot of the BCI work we do is often in lab, and you can't really necessarily work it at home, but they set it up for the participant at home. And they really showed that the participant was using the system up to 8 hours a day. And that's really a participant with, ALS, so his ability to speak is really reduced. And it's really hard to understand him. And he can really use that system to just really communicate again. And he even is getting faster and faster with that system, which is such a great result. Like really the fact that this is at home, the participant can use it and communicate every day with his family is such an impressive and great outcome for the BCI world. I think that's just so great. And so that talk I was really, really impressed by. There was also really cool work about internal speech again. So Erin Kunz from Stanford presented that work. And I think that's also like a really interesting and important question to ask yourself. So for those that are less familiar with internal speech, so usually these BCI devices are controlled by the participant attempting to speak. So they're still trying to do a motor movement. But it turns out that internal speech, so when we talk to ourselves in our mind, can be represented in these brain areas as well. And so she presented some work that showed how internal speech and vocalized speech were both represented in the areas. Usually internal speech is represented less strongly, but they're still able, I think with a vocabulary of 50 words, to decode certain sentences in real time. So that's still, doable, which is really impressive. But also presenting some work on how we can avoid a system to decode that if that's not what the participant wants. So strategies involve, for example, labeling internal speech as silent so that the decoder will not output that. And so it's also interesting to see the kind of work that's being done there. I think that internal speech decoding could be an alternative method for participants that are not able to move or attempt to speak at all anymore. But also, it's just something in general to be careful about, because we obviously, patient privacy is very important. Usually these systems are set up in a way that the participant can choose to change the sentence that is being there. So I think, you know, um, and again, you can't train any of these systems if the participant is not actively trying to do it. But it's important to think about the implications of, if we can pick up some internal speech, how do we deal with that?
Yes, it's so important that they're also addressing those ethical issues, privacy issues. Um, and we have already several questions on the topic. So Omkar Salanki is asking, what's your thoughts on non-invasive speech decoding? Are there any open source data sets to work on for speech decoding?
That's a great question. I have to be honest, the last time I looked into it was maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And I think non-invasively, the success of decoding is quite a bit lower. I think a 2022 study came out that maybe said that, so pairwise decoding of internal speech, oh, you're not necessarily focusing on internal speech. So for
Yeah,
vocalized speech,
just
it's
speech.
probably a little higher, yeah.
Mhm.
But I think for internal speech, it was maybe 70% or 80% decoding between two words. So that's not very high. For vocalized speech, I don't remember specific numbers, but it's usually a small set of words. I'm not sure how and I think there's a few studies that looked at phonemes as well, but it really seems like the amount of information needed, and that's actually one thing that we saw in the BCI world as well. So there's Sergey Stavinsky was at Stanford before, so that's where they started their speech work, and then now he's at UC Davis. But what we've really seen in the field is that the more electrodes are implicated in the process that we're recording from, like the better the signal quality, and the more electrodes we have, the better the decoders are going to be. Because I think the strategies between different participants is not changing a lot, like their pipeline on how they're doing it. But they're really seeing that if we have more information available, we'll get better results. And invasively speaking, right now, we just get so much better information and results than non invasively, because non invasively, we have the skull, we have a lot of artifacts. It's just much harder. I'm sure there are some open source data sets for non invasive speech. If you're talking about invasive method, I'm there are data sets available as well. Most people that publish their papers nowadays also put the data available. I'm pretty sure Stanford and UC Davis, I don't know about UC Davis. There's at least 1 or 2 data sets from the Stanford team about internal speech. My data set is actually available online as well if people want to have a look at that. It's usually not the raw data, it's usually processed data that's available. But there's definitely data sets to play around with if anyone's interested in that. um, a lot of people put their data sets online now.
Yes, yes, I also have seen that. And I saw the latest non-invasive decoding of speech. It was one of the nominations for the BCI award this year. They used G-pangolin, which has a very high spatial resolution. So they have many electrodes on a fairly small area. Although still the accuracy is very low compared with the invasive BCIs, but the field is progressing, and definitely there is need to look at that as well. And in terms of data sets, like you said, Sarah, there are many data sets available, and one that you didn't mention, there is also a data set from Netherlands, from Dr. Hoes lab, and it is a data set with the depth electrodes with stereo EEG, and it's also very interesting data set that is publicly available, and you can work with it. So yes, thank you so much. And what do you think is the reason for this explosion in speech decoding? What contributed to that?
I definitely think that the large language models make a huge impact in that. That's something that, um, they have been trained to do. There's been and that's harder to apply for things like movement, where it's not quite as clear. Like it's not like building blocks that are being put together like that. So I think the fact that we can decode phonemes and from that build words and from that build sentences and just have a model that is going to be able to um, help with estimating what kind of sentence makes the most sense is just a big help, and also is able to I think just speed up the whole process by a lot. um, yeah, so the fact that that developed over the past few years was, I think, so important for the speech PCI field to develop as well. um, yeah, and other than that is like the interest in figuring out that we even can do this. I think there weren't that many. I mean, again, the invasive BCI field is not that big yet. There have been, I think, 40, 50 patients in the entire, like, over the timeline of, ever that have been implanted. And so a lot of the focus at the beginning was really on movement. And then people figured out that areas that are responsible for movement, as grasping, for example, people figured out that speech was represented there as well. So there's a lot of things we still learn about the brain as well, that if we actually put these tiny implants in brain areas that we traditionally thought were only responsible for one thing, turns out that they're often encoding a lot of other things as well. And so there's a lot of work that was done on that. It was like, oh, well, we thought we were in the hand area, but when the participant is speaking, turns out that we can actually decode that. And so I think from there was this shift of like, okay, then let's actually put the implants there where speech should be and see how well we can do that. And then that worked super well. And so they're just continuing expanding that. And I think that's so exciting.
Yes, absolutely. And we're learning so much about the brain with these new technologies and new studies that are coming up. Amazing. What was the most impressive study for you at SfN?
Yeah, it was definitely the study of the speech study with ALS. I just think that that was really the goal, to get a participant the ability to use the system at home and use it daily for hours. That was the goal, I think, for a lot of PCI work. And I think that they're getting incredibly close to that. It's still something that is not going to be easily like to implement for patients. Um, it's still something that right now requires, well, a very invasive surgery, and scientists that are there to set the whole thing up. But I will say that one of the super impressive things they did as well is that, well, they obviously had already built the models with different participants and everything, but they were able to get really good results with the new participant within a day, and not a ton of data. So I think it's really working towards this ability to be able to do that more quickly and to get good results rapidly. And yeah, the fact that it's invasive and requires a big surgery is always going to be a caveat. And so yeah, going towards less invasive methods is definitely something that would allow to have more participants having access to this. Um, Maybe Neuralink will be able to, help with that. They're developing their system to be easier implantable, so maybe that's going to be a way to be useful. Remains to be seen if they can achieve as good results um, as with Utah arrays. It's not quite the same technology, so that would remain to be seen, but it would be interesting. And yeah, there's definitely this trade-off between how invasive do we go and how good our signals are, but how applicable it is for how many people, versus when we get no less invasive, but then with the caveat of not as good results. SEEG, I think, is a little less invasive. It requires a much smaller craniotomy. And the results are good, but they're not as good as with Utah arrays. But that's already, there's a lot of consideration, obviously, if we want to bring that to a lot of people.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking about challenges, now what do you think are the biggest challenges in the field in motor restoring motor function and as well as in speech decoding that still need to be solved or addressed? Because it also can tell us what skills are necessary to address those problems, and people can think about building their careers around those areas and focusing on that. So what do you think those are?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, the Utah areas have been around for a long time now, and they work great, but they're not the most, that's not the system that we're gonna implant in every participant that will require these kind of technologies. So there's always research on like new electrode types and less invasive methods and recording from more electrodes at the same time. So these will all, I think we realize the more data we get, the better results we get. So that's a thing. There's like alternative technologies that are being developed, like functional ultrasound. I know that a former member of my lab, Sumner Norman and Tyson Aflalo, are working towards a startup to commercialize that with first Neurotech. Their method is also invasive, but maybe a little less invasive, as I think they attach an implant on the skull, at least that's the goal, with functional ultrasound, which can probably also bring a lot of other application because they can go pretty deep in the brain and stimulate as well. Um, so yeah, I think there's again this trade-off between quality of signals and invasiveness that's constantly going to be addressed, needs to be addressed. I think in that regard, I think there is really it's such a multidisciplinary field where like yeah, if you're a great mechanical engineer or chemical engineer or like all kinds of engineering are required as different steps, I think. And again, yeah, if you're great at machine learning, that's always a great skill for analyzing all the data that we have. One thing that sometimes people struggle with a bit is stability of the signals that can reduce over time. So it can happen that the signal quality drops over time, and then that needs to be readdressed. But honestly, the speech decoders have also seemed to be quite stable with the amount of data that I've been using. So that seems to also work well. Yeah, new ways to look at the data. The different types of signal processing techniques that always being looked at, and there's a lot of work on that. So there's really a ton of different areas to work on. I think from the evasing standpoint, it's still going to take a bit of time before there's going to be a huge market for invasive BCI like positions, like in a sense that I mean there's way more than when I started my PhD. When I started my PhD, a lot of the companies that are nowadays commercializing this, like Synctron um, or Neuralink or Paradromics, they didn't exist yet. And so, or at least I wasn't aware that they existed. They weren't like huge yet. And I think now they are slowly hiring people and getting people to be in the field. So I think there's more and more demand. It's still going to take a little bit of time before I think that demand is like enormous. I still think that going through academia right now can help to get into that field. At least doing some research in it. Maybe a PhD is not necessarily required, but maybe doing a master's in that field and getting some experience in that, just to be aware of what's going on if you want to work on invasive technologies, because there are just not as many places in the world yet. I think the US is a great spot for this, but there are not as many places in the world yet where this kind of work is being done.
Yes, that's true. And I have one question which concerns what you were talking about. Having more electrodes leads to better decoding accuracy, better results. And we had a question from Yuri Beno, who was asking, in cochlear implants, increasing the number of electrodes beyond approximately 22 does not significantly improve sound perception. This is because the brain's auditory system can interpret sounds effectively with a limited number of frequency channels due to the linear organization of the auditory nerve and the brain's adaptability. In contrast, speech BCIs require far more electrodes, hundreds to thousands, to capture the complex neural signals associated with speech motor control. However, similar to cochlear implants, increasing electrode density in BCIs faces diminishing returns. Beyond a certain point, adding more electrodes may not meaningfully improve accuracy due to signal overlap redundancy and the brain's biological limits in generating distinct signals. Given these similarities in diminishing returns, how do you think we should balance the number of electrodes with the practical limitations of processing and interpreting neural data in speech BCIs? So where is the limit after which it doesn't provide us meaningful information?
This is a good question, and I think people often try to do these kinds of analysis where they'll drop the number of electrodes and see how well the coding goes. Um, there is definitely a trade-off. To be fair, if you do put 1,000 electrodes in an area that is not modulating to whatever you're wanting to decode, you will not get good results. Um, so when I say number of electrodes, of course that is important, but also where do you put your implants? For example, there are some implants in locations that I think people were trying broadcast area because they expected speech to work or decoding to work really well there, and turns out that these channels just don't modulate much for speech. So even if the quality of the recording you're getting is really good, if that area does not modulate, then or it does not change the activity based on words, then it's actually useless. So there is a trade-off, obviously, between a number of electrodes but also locations. And I think, that's honestly a big consideration. I mean, we obviously want to put electrodes in areas that are going to be most active, but it also can be interesting to put electrodes in different areas to do different to be able to decode different processes. But then that's the trade-off where, like, okay, if we put electrodes in these areas that are far away from each other, the surgery might be more complicated and might take longer. We might take 2 craniotomies. I think in the end, we don't have enough. We haven't implanted enough people. We haven't done this enough to really know where the limits are. There's honestly only 3-4 people that have done these speech BCI work, and so the invasive one. And so I don't think we have enough data yet to say what the trade is going to be. There might be at some point a patient that's going to be implanted with more electrodes, and it's not going to work better, and it's not going to be more stable, and then we'll know that it maybe wasn't necessary. But for now, everything honestly is so patient dependent and so patient specific that if in one participant we see that 200 electrodes is enough, and the next participant we might not see the same thing. And so that is still something we have to figure out.
Thank you so much. We have another comment. Vitaly Karpichuk says that it's amazing live stream. Now we have Paris Asfori, who is saying that that's really amazing, the research that you talked about, and she is asking about rehabilitation you discussed. Is this used widely in rehab centers, or it is still in research centers? And maybe you can also comment on when can we expect it to have more widely used.
Yeah, that is really depending on the kind of technology we're talking about. TSCS, to be fair, I'm not an expert on this, so don't quote me, but TSCS is definitely something that's been used much more widely, and I think has started to be used in rehab centers, and definitely helps with recovering motor force and recovering a certain like movements that participants were not able to do anymore, certain muscle groups. TCS is non-invasive, and so it is much easier to apply that in a much larger range of people. But I still think it's still mostly in research, though, just because I think there needs to be additional data to really, make sure it's safe, make sure that. I don't think TSCS has been unsafe, but I think it just takes a long time until things go from research to application. And I think TSCS is probably pretty close to that because it's non-invasive. For invasive work, it's currently really mostly in labs. There are companies like Synchron that have a few participants that are implanted, so that's mostly out of lab. But in rehab, these technologies are not really used in rehab, the invasive ones yet. No, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. And now we have some questions regarding the careers. Adam Jones, PhD, is asking for those that might have overlapping skill sets, interest. How freely do you see people get the opportunity to wear different hats?
That's a great question. I think in research, absolutely, we you can. I think it's pretty. I think when you join a lab, I mean, it depends how the lab's being run. And honestly, if you want to join a lab, I highly recommend to always reach out to people that are already in the lab and ask them how does the lab run. There are different labs have different practices. There are certain labs where someone might do designing the experiment, going to the participant, recording the activity, analyzing the data, and write the paper, and it's all the same person. There are other labs where they might have certain people that run all the sessions, and you might be designing the experiment and analyzing the data, but you might not be there during the experimental design. That is really lab specific, and so reaching out to labs and figuring out how they run, I think it's the best way to do that. Talk to the students and ask them how it's going. That's really lab specific. In industry, I suppose that it's a little more focused what you do, that if you're part of a data analysis team, you'll only work in the data analysis, but you're not going to go and I mean, to be fair, a lot of these things, it makes sense that if you want to do it big scale, it's becoming more and more narrow. I think in academia is really cool that you can be involved in several of the processes. And depending on the lab, there's also sometimes um, some professors are pretty open about what kind of specific research you want to do, and they might let you explore. That's actually how I got to do internal speech. I started working on grasping, started seeing really cool speech signals in the area we were encoded we were looking at, and then focused towards speech because my professor was open to that. So yeah, wearing different hats is probably easy in academia.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we have several questions about how to start. For example, how to start a career in BCI with a PhD in biomedical sciences and a specialization in neuroscience with a background in psychology. What are available opportunities for graduate students and after graduation? So now Naureen Saeed is asking.
Yeah, that's a great question. I personally was lucky that the school I was in, so I did my undergrad and master's at École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland, that actually had a neuroprosthetic division. A lot of the work there that was done was non-invasive. And so that gave me my first in for the world of brain machine interfaces. And honestly, starting with non-invasive is great. Um, there's a lot of similarities. Obviously, the signal you get is a little different, but signal processing wise and analysis wise and how to think about the whole system is going to be very similar. And there are definitely more labs that do non-invasive work. Most schools are not going to have an invasive BCI. That's just, there are just too few invasive BCI labs in the world right now. But non-invasive, I think there's way more schools that have it. They might do EEG or EMG. If you're lucky, maybe some labs are doing SEEG. So trying to get experience in these labs. So I was able to do like short semester projects in two labs that were doing EMG and EEG. So that was for me really good in to get experience in that. I also was lucky that we actually had classes about this as well. And then I was able to use the connection of my professor by asking him, hey, do you know people that do invasive work? I would be interested in doing my master project in that. And I was really lucky, and Richard Anderson responded to me. And so that's how I actually got the opportunity to do my master project there and then to do my PhD there, which was really, really amazing. So I think getting experience in that field is definitely going to help. So reaching out to labs around you that do this kind of work. And again, non-invasive does not mean you can't transition to invasive later if that's what you want to do. Other than that, there's definitely also work done in animals. So if you don't have a non-invasive lab that is around, there's a lot of people that do this kind of work in animals. And so getting experience in that is also incredibly valuable. One of the person in my lab that did the PhD with me had more experience in monkeys, and so transition from that is also absolutely an option. Basically, anything that can give you experience in this field that is related, if you then want to transition to invasive work, is going to be very valuable. And then networking, I think. Um, that is not easy to do, I think, when you're in undergrad or if you're younger. I definitely struggled with that a bit, but actually going to conferences and talking to people is going to be very valuable. You can also reach out to people. I mean, professors might not always respond to you, but you can reach out to other people. I think most people that I know are happy to have a half an hour Zoom call with someone that's interested in the field and just chat. And, that's another good way. And as I mentioned, there's also data sets online now. So there's people that publish their paper, they put their data set there. You can usually download it, you can try to play around with it. If you tell someone, hey, downloaded this data set and I looked into this part, then they would definitely think that you're super interested in the field, and that would definitely be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. This is a great opportunity and to train yourself by analyzing data set, and then to showcase your skills, to put this in your portfolio and send, together with your email, a link so people can look at what you do, what you did and how you did. Thank you very much, Sarah. You also mentioned networking, participating in the conferences. So, what would be your recommendations for networking and, in general, preparing for the conference to get the most of it, even such a big event as SfN? So,
Yeah, that's a great question. So for SFN specifically, I like that they usually they have an app or an online planner where they put all the abstracts. Again, that's something that's also, I feel like, getting easier with time or harder with time because there's more work that I want to see. But you can put in keywords to figure out, finding abstracts about keywords that you're interested in. If you know some people in the field, which at the beginning, honestly, I didn't. But with time, you get to know who's doing what, so you can look up the people's name, like look for the PI's name, and you'll see all the abstracts that are related to that. So that's something I do usually before SFN to figure out, okay, what do I want to see? What NANA symposiums do I want to see? Which posters do I want to see? And just doing that. They even have curated now. They have curated topics now on the SFN app where you can choose a topic that you're interested in, and they will have curated already a certain list, and you can adapt that list. These things are really valuable, I think, for SFN. Not every conference is as big as that one. I went to the BCI conference last year, which super recommended that one. It's really, really great. But everything there was BCI, so you don't have to plan as much, but then you also want to see everything, which is also it's easier to do because there are less people, but you might have a 9-hour day where you're like, oh my god, I need to see everything. um uh yeah, so for preparing for SFN, for that, I think that networking happens automatically at poster sessions. Presenting a poster is a great way to have conversation. It's actually sometimes more valuable than having a talk. Doing a talk, many people might see your work, but you don't really have that moment after where you can really walk through the figures, explain them, have good conversations with people where you can go more in depth about your topic. So poster sessions can be really, really great for that. If you don't have a poster, go and talk to the person that has a poster, show that you have interest in the work. That's going to be a great way to introduce yourself to someone. If you've read their work and they realize you have experience with it, they'll definitely, that's definitely going to be like, I mean, in the end, most people are just incredibly happy to share their research and their science. And there is also, as SFN specifically, I know that I would struggle with the fact being like, ooh, I'm gonna ask a question and I'm gonna sound stupid. But there's a huge field. So at SFN, you will meet someone that also does neuroscience, but is completely unrelated to your field. So they might not know anything about your field. And these people, also come to your poster and, obviously have great conversations with them too. So there aren't any stupid questions in that regard. And so yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions, even if it's honestly overwhelming. I get that. But also, yeah, just if you're nice and have nice conversation and good questions, people will appreciate that for sure.
I absolutely agree. Actually, we love when people are asking questions, and many people are happy to explain when people are asking, because many of the people who work in research, they're also educators, so they love to educate and transfer that knowledge that they have to other people. So. Please feel always free to ask, to come, and I'm sure you will receive so much knowledge and support that you even wouldn't imagine that you will receive.
Yeah, and it can also help to just say, "Hey, I'm a beginner in this field. I might," because also one thing, and we all think we're not going to do it, but the more we get in this career and the worse we do it, is that we start talking about things and we think everyone knows because it's been so long that we're in this field that we forgot what we don't know. And so people will talk and don't realize that they're using complicated terms or terms that have very specific meanings. And I'm sure I do it now too. When I was younger, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I do it all the time probably. And like really asking people to clarify what things mean is totally fine. It's just something that happens with time, that you just forget what you don't know when you are not in the field. And yeah, telling people, I'm a beginner, can you explain this term again, I'm not familiar with it, please do it. And people usually try to adapt what they say based on that. They're not going to think, oh my God, how do you not know this? Because honestly, sometimes certain terms are just, they keep coming up in papers, I feel, and they're not defined anywhere specifically. Like you just kind of have to, like, someone has to tell you what it means, right? But yeah, so for outreach, poster sessions are great for that. There's socials sometimes that are specific for certain topics, so you can go to the socials. Um, and depending on which city you live in, for example, I know that New York City has a Neurotech meetup that happens from time to time, and so they have this is an event that is, people from the BCI world started it. I think it was Synchron and Open BCI, and I think maybe some people from Meta, but I'm actually not sure. A few of those people started it, but now it's being attended by a variety of different people. There's always students there that ask questions, and that's a good way to meet people that are in that world. That's specific on which city you live in, I think, but there might be something like that in your city. There are newsletters. I think some people do newsletters that you can learn things about. You can listen to Milena's podcast. She's covering a lot of PCI word.
Thank you. I'm doing my best, and I'm very grateful to everyone who is coming and sharing their knowledge about their experience in neurotech and careers. And thank you to you, Sarah, as well. Let's have a look at the questions, the ones that are still left. So we have a similar question to what we had before. Do you have any advice for undergraduate students that want to get into the field of BCI? Alexia Mahone is asking, but I think we covered that already. Yes. Let me see. And another one is from Paris. Paris, we already answered. Aggie, Jimon, how to start career in BCI for someone with experience in user experience, UX research among people with disabilities. I'm not sure if you are well familiar with this field, but if you have any suggestions, Sarah, you are welcome.
I'm not super familiar with that field. I do think that there will probably be quite a big need for people in UX design once there are a bigger patient population that, like, once people start designing these systems that the bigger patient populations are going to use. I'm not, honestly, I could see big labs that have the funding to hire someone in order to do that. I think that's something that probably will be in demand, but about I'm not sure about yet if that's like a big thing already or not. But I suppose in the future it will be. Um,
Yes, we actually had a very nice podcast with the Pierre, I think Pierre Leche. I will send a link. So it's a great center in Canada, and they do a lot of research, and you can just look at the resources that they provide, and they're being very active on LinkedIn. They're sharing, yes. So, Pierre Majoric Laguerre, he is talking about neuroscience, how neuroscience informs user experience. And I will add a link to this podcast in the chat. And if you're interested, you can definitely explore more about that. Here is about user experience here. Yes, so I think I also agree. This is the field that is growing, and there is more and more demand in the field. So you definitely have an opportunity there. Just again, networking, attending certain events that are focusing on this specific topic. I think that that can bring you a long way towards your goal. Okay, so I think that that would be it. There is the last question. A LinkedIn user is asking: is there any opportunity for biology neuroscience students to get involved with your amazing work? Example: internships, voluntary part-time work, etc. So I don't know if
Yeah, so I think a lot of labs take undergrads. So if you're in that school, you might be able to do like like not full time, but like be involved in the lab for like a longer amount of time. I know that at the Function Institute, we get summer interns. So reaching out to do a summer internship, absolutely. We love when people already have interest in this field and want to learn more about it. That's like a 10-week project, I think. Yeah, if there's like the thing is you kind of need to live somewhere close to where that is if you want to do it like voluntarily or part-time or something. Yeah, you need to live somewhere close where a lab like that exists. I think virtually right now would be a little hard to do that. But yeah, you can definitely reach out to you can definitely reach out to the Boughton Lab as well, the Chad Boughton Lab, if you're interested in a summer internship, and you know that could be a possibility. And I think for other labs that might be true as well.
yeah, but probably you need to start in advance. Yes, it's a process and application.
Yeah, yeah.
Usually starts.
Also, I know the Feinstein has its own summer internship way to select people, so I'm not sure really exactly how it works, how much freedom we have to select our interns, but I know that there is definitely a program there, and reach out if you're interested.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think that we answered all the questions and addressed all the points we wanted to address. Is there anything maybe we haven't discussed yet and you think that it's important to mention before we end our conversation today?
I think I would just mention that, yeah, the increase of the field has been really impressive. I honestly, when I started my PhD, I thought, oh, I'll probably do my PhD in this work and it's going to be like such an interesting work, but I'm not sure, or I don't expect to be able to stay in this field forever. If I only do my PhD in that, that's fine. It's so cool. I'm happy to do that. And nowadays, I think that there's, more and more opportunities to build a whole career about it. And so I think that's really exciting. I really think there's gonna. I know there's this report that came out the other day about expectations, how the BCI field is evolving and how much money it's involved in that. I didn't read it yet, but it seems like it's going up. It's booming, and I think especially for non-invasive work, I think there's a ton of startups that are doing that, creating and starting with stimulation and decoding and things like that. So I think the field is just going to continue to grow. Actually, one thing I didn't mention also is that there's really cool work on visual prosthetics. I was not able to go to see those talks because they were overlapping with other talks, but there is also really cool work on putting implants on the retina to allow patients to see again when they have certain diseases. That has been actually with Second Sight has been going on for many years already too. But I think they're also getting better and better in that regard, which is really exciting. So yeah, if you're interested in vision, I think visual prosthetics are starting to become pretty big and really successful.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That's an exciting field, and I also saw just recently published, I think, papers on that as well.
Yeah,
Um, And I think even at Synchron, one of the people working there, he was initially working on the prosthetics, on I think retina implant. Yeah, we have a podcast. Nick Opi, yes. Yes, I think so. I might be misleading, but I can add this information into our into our chat. We got one more question, Sarah. You've participated in decoding speech purely from thought imagination. If I wanted to do same thing with movement, for example, what happens in the brain when you imagine moving an external object without imagined limbic movement? What decoding method would you recommend for a master's level research? For example, using fMRI.
It would really depend how that is being instructed, I think. So from what I read, that seems more like a little like trying to move things without limbs. I suppose it's a little bit more like Star Wars, kind of like, like the power, just moving things around. That's interesting. I think that's like a different kind of signal than what the movement or the speech ones are about. Like, I'm not sure that would be. And also, honestly, I think it really would depend on the strategy of the participant. It really depends what the participant would really attempt to do. And then based on that, where that might be encoded in the brain. fMRI notoriously is a little slow. So you're not gonna like it will take 2.5 seconds or so to get to the bold signal. So fMRI for that might be a little slow, depending again how the participant is instructed, how long they're holding that thought, how long they're doing that imagined or attempted imagined movement. Um, but then again, it depends really how strong the signal is. Maybe you can pick it up with EEG, but I think honestly, for a project, I would find a lab that does any of the recording technologies we've talked about today, and then see what you can do with that. In the end, what you can do depends on what's around you as well. You can look at everything with every technology, but there will be different levels of success with it.
And also, we had some, I think, BCI award submissions, or at least work done with the combination of FNIRS and EEG for this type of work, so which provides and good, better spatial resolution and good temporal resolution. So each method brings their own, so the combination might be also
Yeah, a combination also, I think.
Mhm. Yes, yes, and vision research. I was correct. It was Nicholas Opie uh, uh, from Synchron. He worked before he started doing the work with Synchron. He worked on retinal implants. So you can look at that as well. And I think it's research was done a lot in Australia. And I think
Yeah,
it's
that's where Synchron started. Yeah.
prominent there. Yes, excellent. No, I think we had a great conversation. We had many questions. So I would like to, of course, wish you, Sarah, all possible success, and to all the team of Professor Boughton, all the success for the work you are doing, and hopefully it will be growing and expanding and translated into already centers where people can use it for rehabilitation. And I also want to encourage everyone who listened to us today and watched us to continue tuning in to our Neurocareers news and updates. So I hope we will be able to bring you more new exciting information. And if you are interested, you can always schedule a free Neurocareers consultation with me. If you would like to discuss how to get to the field, I will just provide you with my advice, and hopefully it will help you also to progress in the field. So I wish you, all of those who are getting into the field, also all possible success. So thank you for watching, and bye bye until next time.